so I suck at drawing. What's worse is that I think in pictures, and I want to create what's in my head. Stand by. So in school, we learned about learning styles. I remember it was always like some kind of personal development part of a course. And so you'd have like auditory and visual and tactile. And I remember going on and on and on, trying to figure out your visual, auditory, tactile method of learning. It was the hot topic of the day. But there's a problem with that because like you're learning all this information and there seems to be different efficiencies attached to it. But then once you've learned it and it's in your head and you're thinking about it, how do you think about it? Well, it's something that I've been thinking about, and I found out that basically people either think in pictures or they think in words. Now, it's not one or the other. It looks like it's on a normal distribution. So 65% of the population is going to be some blend of the two. But then there's going to be a bunch of yahoos at the tails of the distribution that are going to be either totally one way or totally the other way. One of the problems is that I think in pictures, almost exclusively. And it's only something I've recently found out like 1 or 2 years ago. And it's been, retrospectively, a giant source of pain and frustration in school, as well as really slowed me down in making stuff. I remember, man, it was like in high school. I remember we had those TI-83 graphing calculators. They're probably on different models by now, but the fact of the matter is that even in like 1999, and when I was in high school, yeah, I know it's a while back, that we would have these graphing calculators. So you had a calculator that could draw a picture. And I remember learning that and thinking about that on the way home on the bus and having this big manual in front of me for the calculator. And I remember actually reading a bunch of it, and it talked about all the functions. Like this thing was like 1.5 inches thick, and it wasn't like in 17 different languages. It was just one. So what I found out is that you could turn mathematical equations into pictures. And then what you could do is you could manipulate the picture and then turn it back into math. And then you could write that down. Now, man, I had such a hard time in math with this because when I figured out that I could have success and success actually quicker and show my work, I'm like, man, I can actually solve this. And I'm like, oh, it draws a graph and there's like all these shaded lines under the graph. That was pretty revolutionary, and I'm kind of discovering that now as I start the YouTube stuff. I actually remember it now that I'm thinking about it. I'd solve problems at home, and I remember going to Staples or Future Shop and getting like the cord, like the serial cord that connected your calculator to like the PCs at the time, and it was like on serial port. And it was like a hard thing to set up, but like I figured it out. And so I remember instead of like writing like procedural code of how you solve the problem, I remember taking screenshots of my calculator screen and then pasting that into a Word document and then handing the Word document with the answer at the bottom. And so I showed my work, but I rapidly found out that was not okay. Even though it was very fast and intuitive, and I would get the problem right. And that didn't help. The fact is that then I found out you could program a calculator to do that. And so I remember in math class, the teacher would walk up and down the rows, clearing all the program memory of all the calculators in our class. And I would spend my study time, because I knew kind of what was going on. And it made more sense to manipulate the pictures, but you had to like show your answer in text. So I remember I get my calculator cleared, and I would remember the code, and because it just made sense to me. And so what I would do is, when the test started, my programs were all cleared. I'd first spend the first 10 minutes programming a calculator to solve the problems for me. And I would do really well. I'd get the answer, but I would lose marks because I couldn't show my work because it didn't make sense to me. But graphically, it made lots of sense to me. So I would always get, on the multiple choice tests, I would do really, really well, but on the long answer tests, I wouldn't do well because I couldn't show my work in the manner that was accepted at the time. So how does that come into now with this YouTube stuff? Well, I'm gonna have to make a lot of stuff from scratch. You can't buy Streamliner parts. A lot of it is it's a form of creativity, and I have to take the pictures that are in my head and I have to make them out of things like plates and bars and tubes and stuff like that. And so how do I do that when I can't draw, but I can think of these things? Well, that actually came a little bit later in high school, and I only recently kind of remember that. I remember in Mr. Johnson's drafting class that I took in grade 10, we would start with like manual drafting, and I thought this was so good. I can draw perfectly straight lines at perfect angles. Now, my skill as a draftsman really kind of hung me up because it's like I wanted to get it perfect, because it's like when you're making something, you want to get it right. And I thought that was really great. It wasn't all these kind of wavy lines that, many art teachers would try to teach you growing up. So I thought that was pretty cool. But then we went on to the other side of the classroom, which had computers. And I still remember we were all 30 of us or whatever in that class were around Mr. Johnson sitting down on like AutoCAD 9 or something like that. Like you're still using commands with one hand and a mouse with the other. And I remember this drawing that we had drawn earlier, like a couple weeks before, and he sat down, fired up AutoCAD, and he drew the thing perfectly in minutes. And I remember that. I don't remember what happened the rest of it. I was just like, wow, that was fast. And then when it became my turn, it was so intuitive. I didn't have to think a lot. It was like, what's the command to do the thing? It's like, and then you search and there was a manual around, and I remember coming in at lunchtime, but it was like so intuitive. And it was so good to be able to draw the things in my head. So where does that leave me today? Still can't draw. Still having trouble turning the things that I'm seeing in my head into objects in the real world. Well, Fusion 360 is a CAD package that chumps like me can afford because it's free, because we make no money at this. But I recently found out that there's another device called a Cricut that's aimed totally at the scrapbooking market, to cut out bits of paper and tulle and fabrics. And I remember learning about these things at a camp I used to work at that would throw these scrapbooking retreats for ladies. And back then, you would like show up with your laptop and you'd open up this like book of CDs that you got from the craft store. You'd click it in the drive and shut the drive, but you could only print, or you could only cut off those images. It was like a lockdown ecosystem. And I think I messed around with it to try to import a file with no success. But I recently remembered about these things on a trip to the grocery store or on to work, because back in high school, in Mr. Peters' Comtech class, we had this Roland CNC drag knife that I would cut banners and like silkscreen designs out of. But they were really expensive. Like most people just couldn't buy it. It was like an industrial thing. Worked really well. But the quality over the years, as I learned, has kind of come quite a ways with these Cricut things. So you can actually cut real making materials. And I was wondering, could I actually put my own design in there? And it turns out you can. So then what I did is I'm actually able to draw something in Fusion, export it, and with some massaging into the Cricut design space. And then you can cut templates out of chipboard. And what's more so is it's really repeatable. So then you can laminate the templates. And then what you can do is laminate those templates so you can put a transfer punch through it and line up your bolt holes accurately time and time again. And that's really good because then I can cut it out of steel or aluminum or whatever, and the templates are not, crappy junky ones like, this one out of like dollar store paper. So I'll go over my process of how I actually do that, but I just wanted to give you some background on the genesis of this idea, because these Cricut devices, they're not like marketed towards what I'm doing at all. I've talked to my friends that do scrapbooking. They're like, "Oh man, that's such a good idea. You should totally talk to Cricut and like get them to enter into a new market segment." Cricut, if you're out there, give me a DM. I'll gladly talk to you and show you how to do this. In future videos, I'll actually show you the process of how to take something for your brain, put it in Fusion 360, and then cut like a flat planar template that you can cut stuff out of. That one there is a motor mount. I got another one right there. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that, and for the time being, and I'll see you later. This is Colin, your fake internet engineer.